Let me tell you. Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Yud Aleph, Daf 11, Masechta Hagiga. Friends, who could tell me what Daf Yud Aleph talks about? Well, Daf Yud Aleph continues on our discussion of discussing these things that are like alluded to in the Torah. So we're going to continue with that, and we're going to wrap up, friends, the first perek of Masechta Hagiga, and we're going to start the second perek. Friends, let me tell you, there's some interesting things. So let's begin over here. We're on Daf Yud Aleph. We already made some headway yesterday, Baruch Hashem. So we are at the two dots, about 10 lines into the page in Daf Yud Aleph, Mud Aleph. Mikra muat ve'alochis merubis. Okay, what was that said in reference to? It was said by Shabbos Hagiga Me'ila that they're like a mountain suspended on a hair, and they are a little bit of psukim and a lot of halachis. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? Tana, alright, we learn in a brisa. Nigayim va'oyeles mikramot v'alachas merubis. So we learn in a brisa that when it comes to nigayim, who can tell me what nigayim are? Like tsaras, afflictions, the leprosy stuff. Ve'ohalos, as well as the halachis of tumas ha'oel. Mikramot, it's not talked about too much in the Torah. Halachas merubis, and yet there are lots of halachas. Now, friends, maybe you were wondering this already as I was saying it. Nigoyim mikra muat, nigoyim mikra merubahu. What do you mean? There's not so much in the Torah about tsaras. Friends, have you ever heard of Parshas Tazria? Have you ever heard of Parshas Mitzorah? Well, does Tazria talk about that stuff? I feel like it does. I'm sure I'd have to look it up. But friends, there's like whole parshas that talk about tsaras. Like, what do you mean it doesn't talk about it so much in the Torah? It talks about it a ton in the Torah. So Amar Rav Papa says, Rav Papa Achi Kama, this is what it means. Nigayim, okay, when it comes to tsaras, mikra meruba, there's actually a lot of psukim. Ve'alachas muatos, however, the halachas outside of the psukim are fewer. Oalos, however, when it comes to tumas ha'oel, so mikra muat doesn't talk that much about tumas ha'oel. Ve'alachas merubis, but there are, let me tell you, there are lots of halachas about oalos. Friends, isn't oalos like 2 books of Mishnayos? Like, it's big. Umay nafkamina. Okay, givaldig. So the Gemara wants to know, okay, practically speaking, what's the difference? Great. So when it comes to tsaras, there's a lot of psukim, not a lot of halachas. When it comes to tumas ha'oel, so there's not a lot of psukim, lots of halachas. Okay, so how does that make my life better? So you mistap galach milsa benegoyim ayin bekroi ve'i mistap galach milsa beolos ayin b'masdisin. So the Gemara answers, well, for the practical difference is, let's read that again. You mistap galach milsa benegoyim. Well, if you have a question about a halacha when it comes to tsaras, so where should you look? Ayin bekroi. Look in the verses, in the psukim. Right, that's where there's the bulk of the literature. And if you have a question about halachas of tumas ha'oel, so then your best bet is to look in the Mishnayos, because there aren't enough psukim about it. Friends, moving on. Dinan, when it comes to the halachas of judgments, so michtav ksivon. So the Gemara says, what do you mean there aren't so many psukim about it? The Torah talks about monetary financial cases, halachis. So lo nitzucha, so it's needed elel Rebbe. It's needed for example what Rebbe teaches. The Tanya is within the Brisa. Rebbe Omer says, Rebbe nefesh tachas nefesh mammon, right? That it says that if you what was the pasuk say? V'chinotzu anoshim. You have Reuven and Shimon, they're fighting. I don't know why, but they are. Right? So that if right. So it says in the pasuk, so Reuven and Shimon for whatever reason are fighting, and it says that if they hit Rachel and she doesn't die, right? So if Reuven and Shimon hit Rachel and causes her to have a miscarriage, but she doesn't die, so then he has to pay money. Then they have to pay money. But vim asun yiyeh, but if she gets killed by Reuven in Shimon's silliness, so then v'nosata nefesh tachas nefesh, well then you have to pay with one soul in place of the other soul. So the question is, so it says mamun, that when we say that a soul for a soul, so it's talking about money. Ata omer mamun, right? Because the assumption is that niskaven lara gazeh v'hara gazeh is potter. That if Reuven intended to kill Shimon, but by accident he killed Rachel, so he's going to be potter for that. So what does he have to pay? He has to pay money. So ata omer mamun ve'eino ela nefesh mamish. Wait a second. How do we know that it means money? Maybe it means that we should have to kill Reuven because he killed Rachel. Well, it says v'nosan beflilim, when it says that Rachel doesn't die, so then he has to pay money. So it also says v'nosata nefesh tachas nefesh, and you will place a soul in place of a soul. So ma lahalun mamun afkan mamun. So just like the nesina by when she doesn't die is money, so also when she does die, it's also money. So there is an example of something that is not written explicitly in the Torah. So so it's an example of dinim, of financial monetary laws that are not explicitly written in the Torah. Avodas, when it comes to avoda, to the service of the priests in the temple. So michtav ksivan, the Gemara says, well, doesn't the Torah talk about the service of the Kohanim in the temple? So the chiddush here is when it comes to bringing the blood to the mizbeach. So kilu, you have an animal in the hazara, you slaughter it, the blood goes in, right? You do kabbalah sadam, you receive the blood in a receptacle. You then walk, you do right hakrava, you halacha sadam. You then bring the blood to the mizbeach, and then of course you throw it on the mizbeach. So the Tanya, as we learn in the Brayse v'ikrivu, that when the pasuk says v'shachad is ben abakul, I'm reading the pasuk v'shachad is ben abakul f'nei Hashem v'ikrivu b'nei aharon hakohanim b'sadam. So it says that they will slaughter a cow, and then the sons of Aaron will bring close the blood. So zo kabbalah sadam. So that's a reference to receiving the blood. It's a reference to receiving the blood. That when the pasuk says ve'ikrivu, that they'll bring the blood close, it's a reference not to bringing the blood to the mizbeach, but rather to receiving the blood after it's been slaughtered. So you slit the neck, and then the blood goes into the receptacle, and that's kabbalah sadam, receiving the blood. So now, okay, so when it says that they'll bring close the blood, it means that they'll actually receive the blood in the receptacle. And the reason why the Torah, when teaching about receiving the blood, mentions ve'ikrivu, right? Mentions receiving the blood in a way that certainly sounds like it means to bring it towards the mizbeach. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, just like the pasuk says ve'ikriv hakohen es hakol ve'iktar mizbecha, that when the pasuk says by a korban olah that you will take all the limbs and things and bring them forth towards the altar, we said that in that case, when it says vehikriv, it actually means that you're going to bring the limbs of the animal to the ramp of the mizbeach. So we see that just like when it says by korban olah vehikriv hakohen es hakol, that the kohen will bring it forth, and that's holacha. So also that means that, right? So it means that vehikriv, it means to bring forth. So then how come when it says ve'ikrivu zo kabbalah sadam, that when it says in this other case, what kind of animals is this? V'shachar is ben abakul v'neshtem ve'ikrivu ben dam v'zokas dam. What was this? Maybe I think korban olah. Okay. But anyways, in that context, when it says ve'ikrivu, means kabbalah sadam. So the question is, as we saw by the other example, when it says ve'ikriv hakohen es hakol ve'iktar mizbecha, that means, right, ve'ikriv means to bring the limbs of the animal to the mizbeach. So that's holachas, right, bringing forth. And yet when it says ve'ikrivu, that when it says ve'ikrivu b'nei aharon hakohanim es adam, that's kabbalah sadam. So the question is, why does it refer to kabbalah sadam, receiving the blood? Why does it say it ve'ikrivu as bringing it forth, if really it's talking about receiving it? Le'meimer, to say to holacha lo tapka miklal kabbalah, that holacha sadam has the same status as receiving the blood. And what that means is, technically speaking, you don't have to do holachas adam. Technically speaking, you don't have to bring the blood to the Mizbeach. Theoretically, if you would slaughter the animal right next to the Mizbeach, well then you don't need to bring it anywhere. It's already where it needs to be. You just throw it on the Mizbeach. So if we don't technically have to do halachas adam, we don't technically have to bring the blood to the Mizbeach because it might already be next to the Mizbeach if you slaughter the animal right next to the Mizbeach. But what it's saying, the reason why it mentions Kabbalas Hadam, the reason why it mentions Kabbalas Hadam, receiving the blood, in the term that is used for bringing the blood towards the Mizbeach, is to teach us that bringing the blood towards the Mizbeach, even though it doesn't have to be done, because you could theoretically slaughter the animal right next to the Mizbeach, however, if you are going to do it, well then, if you do have to bring the blood to the Mizbeach, well then it has the same status as doing Kabbalas Hadam, receiving the blood, that just like receiving the blood, for example, can't be done by somebody who's Tameh, you can't have thoughts of pigul, things like that. So just like those are the halachos of Kabbalas Hadam, the same would apply to holachas adam. Don't think that just because holachas adam you don't have to necessarily do, therefore it's any more lenient when you do it. So no, just whatever stringent halachas would be by Kabbalas Hadam also apply to holachas adam. Alright, friends, moving on. Tyrus. So what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah had said when it comes to Tyrus, it says dinim avodas Tyrus. So it says yesh lana amashi yismichu. You have what to rely upon when it comes to Tyrus, to which the Gemara says michtav ksivan, talks about Tuma and Tyra in the Torah. What do you mean that there's what to rely upon? When it's written in the Torah, state in the Pasuk. Lo nitzucha ela l'shir mikveh. What it's teaching us about is the amount of a mikveh. Right? If you have a mikveh, how big does it have to be? It doesn't say that anywhere explicitly in the Torah. To lo ksiva, it's not written explicitly to Tanya. That rather we learn in a brayso, v'rachadz b'moyim, that he will wash in water b'mei mikveh. That refers to a mikveh as opposed to ma'im chaim, right? Meaning you can immerse yourself in a stream, ma'im chaim, live running waters, or alternatively you can go to a mikveh, which is gathered waters. So how much gathered water do you need? So b'mei mikveh is called b'sar. So in these gathered waters, it's called b'sar, his entire body. Ma'im shekol gufa ola boim. So enough water that his entire body can get in there. V'chamein. So how much water is this? Ama al ama b'rum shalosh amas. The answer is how much water do you need to assume that somebody can get their whole body in there? 1 amma by 1 amma with a height of 3 amas. V'shiru chacham me mikvah boim soya. And the chacham said that the amount of water necessary for a mikvah is 40 sa'ah, and this is not written directly in the Torah. That's what it means that these are alluded to that there's what to rely upon in the Torah. Tmeos, okay, also when it comes to Tuma, Michtav Ksiva Nu, Tuma is also impurity is written in the Torah. It's needed for the size of a lentil from a sheretz. What's a sheretz? Creepy crawler thing. So the lo ksiva, that it's not written, right? It doesn't say anywhere specifically in the Torah that you become tummy if you touch a part of a sheretz that's the size of a barley kernel, a barley thing. No, not barley, a lentil thing. Well, just a lentil. So the lo ksiva, it's not written explicitly. The Tanya is within a brayso boim that the pasuk says, if somebody touches these shrotzim, a dead sheretz will become tummy until the evening. Yachol b'chulon, is it possible you have to touch sort of an entire sheretz? Tamulomer meyem, it can even be part of the sheretz. Yachol b'mikzason, so is it possible that, okay, even if I just touch a small part of it, Tamulomer bahim, therefore it says no, them, not just part of them. Okay, it says part of them, it says them. So what's the deal? So you have to touch Hagiga b'mikzaso shukakulu. You have to touch a part of the sheretz that's like the whole sheretz. And the rabbi said, what is that? It's the size of a lentil. Because if you take some kind of snail kind of thing. So it starts out the size of a lentil. So therefore, because this snail sheretz starts at the size of a lentil, so that's sort of the minimum amount. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer Kiznava Letoya, says Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda that the minimum amount for a sheretz is like the tail of a lizard. That the tail of a lizard, I guess you can disconnect it from the rest of the body, and it kind of moves around, and it's lebedik. So that would be the minimum amount to make you tamei from a dead sheretz. All right, and these are things that are not necessarily written explicitly in the Torah. Arayas, when it comes to forbidden relationships, michlav ksivan, it's written more than once in the Torah. So the Nitzucha Ela, well, it's talking about libito me'anusaso to lo ksiva. All right. That, how do we know, if Reuven, let's say, rapes Rachel, and then they have a daughter, so how do you know that Reuven is not allowed to sleep with the daughter? Okay, friends, we're getting up to Yevamos pretty soon. We're getting up to Yevamos in about 2 weeks. So, anyways, well, because we have all sorts of different psukim. Right? We have psukim say you're not allowed to sleep with a woman and her daughter. Right? You're not allowed to sleep with the daughter of your daughter, with the daughter of your son, but it doesn't say anywhere explicitly that you're not allowed to sleep with the daughter of somebody who you raped. So that is learned out from sort of, the rabbis kind of learn that out. That Rava says that Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, that there's a pasuk that when it says that when the pasuk says Ervas bas bincho bas bitchol segala ervasun ki ervascha, that the sort of unforbidden, right, the forbidden relationship with the daughter of your son or the daughter of your daughter, and we learn that out because we have a different pasuk that says Ervas isho vita lo segala es bas binov es bas bita lo sikach legalas ervasa. So we already know that you can't be with the daughter of your daughter or the daughter of your son from your wife. So we know that already. So we say that when the second pasuk is talking about the daughter of your daughter and the daughter of your son, so that's talking about a child who was born through rape. So therefore, if that is talking about ones, rape, so then we also then learn out in that pasuk that just like in the first pasuk that talks about your granddaughter, it also applies to your daughter. So also by ones, by rape, also it applies to the daughter. And we learn out through, it says Heina by both of them, it says Zima by both of them, and therefore that's how we know that there's a warning for Bito Me'anusaso, even though it's not explicitly written in the pasuk. The pasuk that talks about ones only mentions your granddaughter, but we learn out from Heina, from the Gzer Shav of Heina, comparing both those two psukim, and Zima, that is how we learn out that also your daughter from somebody that was raped. So, if Reuven rapes Rachel and they have a daughter, so then that would be a forbidden relationship as well, and that is not explicitly written in the Torah. All right, Heina and Gufei Torah, and we said in the Mishnah that they are sort of the body of the Torah. Hein in, Hana in, Hanach lo. So what, specifically the items mentioned in the Mishnah are the body of the Torah, but everything else is not? No, they and also the other things are also sort of the body of the Torah. Okay, so I guess lots of things are the body of the Torah. Alright, well friends, that was the first perek of Masechta Hagiga. Moving on now to the second perek. Super interesting stuff. Wait, should I roll up my sleeves? Alright, I could do that. 1 second. Alright, so I rolled up my sleeves, and let's go weiter. Says this is super interesting stuff. Says the Mishnah at the beginning of the second paragraph of Masechta Hagiga, in Darshan Barayas B'Shlosha. Okay, we don't sort of teach Arayas, about the forbidden relationships in a group of 3. V'lo b'maaseh b'reishis b'shnayim, and we don't discuss sort of the creation of the world. sort of like the details of the creation of the world in a group of two. V'lo b'merkava b'yachid. We don't study the Maisim Merkava, right? The beginning of Ezekiel when it talks about God. So we don't study that b'yachid alone. Elim ken hayu chacham u'mevim medaito, unless he's somebody who can just kind of understand it on his own. So then he can study the Maisim Merkava. Wow. Somebody looks at the following four things. Maybe it would be better if he never was born. Malamaila, malamata, what's sort of like up in the heavens, or what's beneath the earth. Malafanu, malachor, what's to the east and to the west. Kilu. Somebody who's trying to understand too much about God, like the details of like what's in heaven and what's below the earth and all that kind of very lofty kind of things. So maybe you should just stay away from that. And if he's so committed to learning these things, maybe it would be better that he didn't actually be born. Interesting. Somebody who doesn't have mercy or sort of sensitivity to the honor of God, so maybe it would be better if he never came to this earth at all. Says the Gemara, Amart Bereisha v'lo b'merkava b'yachid v'ador Amart elim kenoya chacham u'mevim midaito. Friends, what do you think that means? Well, the question is, on the one hand, the Mishnah says v'lo b'merkava b'yachid, that you're not allowed to study the Maisim Merkava, right? The passage in Ezekiel that describes God, so you cannot learn it by yourself. But then you said unless it's somebody who's a scholar and can understand it on his own. So I don't get it. On the one hand, you're saying you're not allowed it, right? Who's going to be learning Maisim Merkava by themselves? Clearly, somebody who's knowledgeable, somebody who's a scholar. And yet, we're then also saying that, right. Meaning, who would be somebody who would learn Maisim Merkava by themselves? Somebody who's a scholar. And still, we're saying no, you're not allowed to study the Maisim Merkava by yourself. But then we're saying unless you're a scholar, then you're allowed to study it by yourself. I don't understand. Can you study by yourself? Can you not study by yourself? So Hachi Kamer, this is how to understand the Mishnah. In Dorshin Barayos Lishlosha, you don't teach Arayos, forbidden relationships, to 3 people, meaning one teacher to 3 pupils. Velo b'maise Bereishis l'shnayim, and you don't have a teacher teaching Maise Bereishis, the creation of the world, to 2 pupils. Velo b'merkava liyachid, and you shouldn't have a teacher teaching to an individual, unless that individual was somebody who was a scholar and can kind of understand things, right? You don't want that the teacher is like going, having to explain in intricate detail, things about God. If the teacher is going to be teaching about the Maisim Merkava to a pupil, so it should be a pupil who can kind of understand things on his own, and the teacher will not need to explain too much and give too many details. In Dorshin Barayos Bishlosha, so we don't teach about the Arayos to 3 students. My timer, how come? Ilema mishum dichsev ish el kol sher b'saro. Well, if you want to suggest, in the context of forbidden relationships, it says ish. Right, so a person to any relative should not sort of sleep with a relative. So ish trey. If you want to say ish is 2. She'er b'saro chad, and she'er b'saro is another one. So that's 3. Do not come close. I.e., do not make a chabura. Do not make a group together. Legalots, to reveal, to discuss, to teach about erva, the arayis. So if you want to say that, okay, so how do you know that a teacher shouldn't teach 3 pupils about forbidden relationships? Because it says ish akol she'er b'saro, and we learned that to mean 3 pupils. What about when it says ish, a person who curses God, chas v'shalom? Ish shaitin mizar lamolech, or a person who gives his children to the avodah zarah called molech. So hachinami, are we going to say that when it says ish, in those cases also by cursing God and by molech avodah zarah, that ish is saying 3 people? So ella hanu mibayle Rather, those are needed. That's necessary to teach us that the Gentiles are also warned against cursing God. Ki Yisrael, and that also went right, just like by the Molech, which is Avodah Zarah. So that ish, it applies to everybody. Even Gentiles also are not allowed to do idol worship, Avodah Zarah. So Hainami mibayle l'rabos es anochrim shemusarna l'rayus ki Yisrael, and therefore here as well, when it says ish akol sher b'sar, what it's coming to teach us is that everybody's included, right? Even Gentiles have to be careful when it comes to forbidden relationships, and therefore, so then back to the question: how do we know that you should not be teaching Ma'asim Merkava to 3? So Ella, the Arayos to 3. So Ella midichsiv ushmartem es mishmarti. Well, when the pasuk says in the context of Arayos, it says, "You will guard my guard." Ushmartem es mishmarti. Ushmartem tre mishmarti chad. When it says ushmartem, you plural, so that's 2. Mishmarti, my guarding, that's another 1. So that's 3. That you shouldn't do any of these bad things. So, but 1 second, when it says, and you should guard Shabbos, you should guard the matzahs to make sure that they don't become chometz. And the children of Aaron should guard the guarding of the holy. So achinami, are we meant over there also to say that that's talking about sort of like numbers of people? So Ella, Rav rather says Rav Ashi, a very practical approach. What does it mean that you can't expound the or teach the halachas of arayos to 3 people? In Dorshin, besisra arayos l'shlosha, we don't teach the sort of hidden depths of forbidden relationships to 3 students. My time outcome. Well, svaru, it's logical. Peitrei, when you have 2 students, so kiyaz v'kamer rabbi, when they're sitting, 2 students sitting before the teacher, chad shokal v'tari ba'adei rabbi, so one of them is going to be engrossed in dialogue with the teacher, vidach matzle udne l'gemara, and the second pupil is going to be listening to the discussion. Right? So if you have one teacher teaching 2 pupils, so one of the pupils will be engaged with the teacher and the other one will be listening. I'm sorry, where am I? Fine. But if you have one teacher teaching 3 pupils, well then so one of them is going to be engrossed in dialogue with his teacher. But the other 2 are going to be involved with each other. So meaning, if you have one teacher and 2 pupils, so one pupil will be in dialogue with the teacher, the other one will be listening. But if you have 3 pupils, so one will be in dialogue with the teacher, and then what are the other 2 doing? They're in dialogue with themselves. And then they don't know what the teacher was really saying. And they can end up saying that one of the forbidden relationships is in fact permitted. And therefore, a teacher should not teach 3 pupils when it comes to arayos, to forbidden relationships, because with 3 pupils, so one pupil will be engaged with the teacher, but the other then will be sort of engaged with each other, and they're not going to learn the halachas, and then you can get into trouble when it comes to forbidden relationships. So the Gemara suggests, wait a second, if it's about 3 students being problematic because one will be engaging the teacher while the other 2 are spacing out, so this should also apply to the rest of the Torah as well. Right? We should never be able to teach 3 students. So Arayu is shiny. So the Gemara answers that, well, forbidden relationships is more sort of sensitive. Because we said, Gezov Arayos Nafshu Machamadtan Umisaveloim, that when it comes to theft, that when it comes to forbidden relationships, a fellow desires them. Yochi Gezel Nami. Okay, so if it's about the particularly significant desire for forbidden relationships, as well as for theft, so then forbidden relationships should not be the only thing that you refrain from teaching with 3. Also, theft should be something that we don't teach with 3 people, because we have to make sure that nobody's going to be spacing out and talking to each other and not know the halachas. So, right, so Yachi Gezel Nami, so the Gemara answers, Arayis bein b'fanav bein shelo b'fanav nafish yitzrei. So Gemara says, look, forbidden relationships are sort of more sensitive than theft. Even though a person might desire both of them, but forbidden relationships are more sensitive, because bein b'fanav bein shelo b'fanav nafish yitzrei. Because when it comes to forbidden relationships, whether it's mamish, the opportunity arises, or whether or not, still it's something that is, the person's Yetzer Hara desires it. Gezel b'fanav nafish yitzrei, shelo b'fanav lo nafish yitzrei. Whereas when it comes to theft, look, when you can see something in front of your eyes that says, wow, I need to have that, so then it can become problematic. But if you don't see anything, then it's not necessarily on your mind as much, whereas forbidden relationships are, and therefore we have to be extra careful when it comes to forbidden relationships, and therefore one teacher should not be teaching 3 pupils. The Mishnah had said that we don't teach about the creation of the world to 2 pupils. But not immediately. How do we know this? The Tanur Rabban, as the rabbis taught, Sha'alna liyom rishonim. So ask to the earlier days. Yachid shoel ve'ein shnaim shoelin. Right? It says sha'al, which is singular, that you can ask about the early days, the days of the creation of the earth, as right to an individual, but not to 2. All right, fine. Now, Frekti Gemara, Yachol Yishol Ha'adam Adam Kodim Shniva Olam is okay, fine. So we just said that he can't teach to 2 students, but he can teach to 1. So it's possible that, as an individual, you can even ask about what happened before the world was created. Talmud Omar, therefore the pasuk says, Liminayom asher bara Elokim Adam ala aretz, that from the day that God created man, from then on, Yacholo Yishal Adam Misheshis Mebreshis. Well, when did God create man? On day 6. Is it possible you're not allowed to inquire about the first, the day, the creation up until then? Therefore it says no to the early days that were before you. I.e., you can even ask about the days of Bereshis before man was created. Is it possible that a person can ask what's above, what's below, what was before, what's after? Therefore the pasuk says that from one end of the heaven to the other end of the heaven. Look, you can ask from one end to the other end, but do not ask what's above that, what's below that, what was before, what's after. That you don't ask about. Just sort of up until sort of the heavens and the earth, and that's that. Well, friends, that was Daf Yud Aleph Masechta Hagiga. So the daf began kind of finishing off those things that are sort of alluded to in the Torah. We referred to things like sort of like monetary judgments, certain halachas about Tuma and Tyra, about Yevamis, right? The daughter of somebody who you had an inappropriate relationship with, Pitum Anasaso, specifically somebody who was raped. And then we got to a new perek, and we talked about different things that you're allowed to teach to different pupils, right? So we said when it comes to arayas, the maximum amount is a group of 3. When it comes to the creation of the world, you could teach when it came to arayos, so you're not allowed to teach a group of 3, right? Up to a group of 3, but really just 2. And when it comes to the creation of the world, only a group of 1. And when it comes to the Ma'aseh Merkava, you can only teach a group of 1 if they are sort of a Talmud Chacham. Alright, fine. Friends, that was Daf Yud Aleph Masechta Hagiga. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.